1. And this is one of these doom and gloom. I know last time one was like, dude, you just did something like very on despair last time. And this is like the signs of the end of the world, sort of, right? And but we're going to look at it a different way. And really the key thing that I want you to hear and I want you to understand so you'll know, you'll see the road before us, is that when it comes to our faith, image is everything. All right? You guys know that, right? I'm actually being serious. Image is everything. Image is incredibly, incredibly important, and I'm just going to do a couple of reasons why this is important, and we're going to look at it. And image is like the worst and the best, I think, of our faith. When we find in Genesis chapter 1, I know I'm going to cover a lot of verses, but it's just going to be like a little lightning tour. We go to Genesis chapter 1 and we look at verses 26 and 27. We find two very important verses here where I'm reading from the Voice. It says that, now, this is God speaking. He says, now let us conceive a new creation, humanity, make in our image, fashioned according to our likeness. So God did just that. He created humanity in His image, created them both male and female. And so really what He's saying is that both men and women, you can power it down, that's fine, I'll just keep reading. But they are both, men and women are created in the image of God. Now that's not individually, that means collectively. God is a plurality. He has created us. Adam, of course, we know by chapter 2 was an incomplete. And it wasn't until Eve was created that he was fulfilled. He was completed. Right? That creation was completed. So we as humanity, we are created in the image of God. Now, we know by Genesis chapter 3, we fell. We had this accident. And it had this reverberation that went out through time, all the time until now, where we have lost the image of God. We've lost the image of God, and this whole history is a movement in which we are trying to regain the image of God. We're trying to, once again, fulfill the image that was instilled in us at the beginning. Does it make sense? And this image is so important. And over again, throughout the Old Testament, we see the people of God who are supposed to be image bearers. They're supposed to show the image of God, the reflection of God to the world that is lost in sin and darkness. Where they, over and over again, even though they're meant to be the image bearers of God, they continue to fail God and humanity because they do not reflect the image of God well. Right? They go and they massacre, nations. They enslave and they imprison and eat their brothers and sisters. They extort and they oppress more than even the heathen nations around them. And you say, what is going on here? I thought you were image bearers. And there's this disappointment with the people of God. And this has been going on, I think, since the beginning. There's a dissatisfaction with the image of God because they do not actually emulate or reflect the image of God. This is very true. Even when you get to the Ten Commandments, God says, don't worship anybody else, right? First thing, and then He says, the very next thing He says is in the second commandment, in these top 10, right? He says in Exodus 20, verse 4, you are not to make an idol or an image of other gods. No, it's about an image again. Right? Because God has this work for us to do, and it's really to restore His image back into His creation that He made. Does it make sense? We were made in His image, but we've lost it, and so it's about image. And of course, this goes on to say, and I want to be clear because sometimes people get confused and they stop in verse 4. He says, don't make an image and then bow down and worship it. Okay? So sometimes you say, don't take my photo because that's an image of me. Or don't make an image of Jesus or God or something because that's blasphemous. It's only blasphemous once you create that image and then worship it, right? In fact, we're called to create or recreate the image of God. This is what we in Christian circles would call character development, because the more our character reflects that divine image, that divine similitude, the greater will be our light and our reflection of light to a lost and dying world. Does it make sense? And so the weird thing is image is everything. Image is everything. So image is vitally important. And so now we get to Luke chapter 21, but not quite. All right? I want us to, you know that these chapters and verses were the visions that came much later in history, right? So the original authors were not like, well, that ends chapter 1, we'll move on to chapter 2. That is not how this played out, right? They wrote an entire letter, and we chopped it up. And so there's kind of a context, and I want you to see the themes that are taking us from Luke chapter 20 and moving us into Luke chapter 21. And we're going to unpack this and how it unfolds. So when we look at this, I'm going to start in Luke chapter 20, starting verse 46. So this is at the end. Luke chapter 20, if you don't know, it's like the Pharisees are having a brouhaha. They're having a fight with Jesus. Are you guys okay? Everything good? Am I talking too quickly? You guys all right? All right. Are we all on the same page? What's the big theme for today? Images. Wow, you guys, I need to pump up the tire again. Okay. What's the big theme? Images. Let's do it one more thing. Image is everything. Okay, let's do it one more time. 1, 2, 3. Image is everything. And weird. Okay, let's do it one more time. Image is everything. Okay, we're getting there, right? And so, look at how the people of God are reacting, they're fighting with Jesus, they're fighting with God. And are they reflecting God, or are they at odds with the reflection of God? Right? And so here at the end of Luke chapter 20, Jesus turns and he says, in the hearing of the religious leaders that he's been fighting with, he turns to his followers and he just calls them out. He says, beware of the religious scholars. They like to parade around in long robes, and they love being greeted in the marketplaces. They love taking the best seats in the synagogues, and they adore being seated around the head table at banquets. But, verse 47 says, in their greed, they rob widows of their houses and cover up their greed with long, pretentious prayers. Their condemnation will be all the worse because of their hypocrisy. So he says, they look the part on the outside, but inside, we find in Matthew 25, he says, you're like whitewashed sepulchres or tombstones. He says, you actually look clean, but on the inside you're filled with dead men's bones. Right? And he says, so your image is not authentic, it's not real, it's what he would call a deception or hypocrisy. And so he says, you're hypocrites because what you pretend to be is not who you are at your core. And these things have to be connected. He says, if you at least live with a modicum of like authenticity, where you just owned, okay, I'm going to rob women or widows and orphans and take their stuff, at least you have some respectability there. But because you're doing this under the guise of good, you've exchanged darkness for light and light for darkness, your condemnation is going to be much worse. And in their lifestyle, they're actually modeling behavior, what they are telling people is righteousness that's leading others astray. We find in Revelation, if anyone takes away from this book, there's extra judgment. If anybody adds this book, if you teach others to do wrong, your judgment is not just on yourself, but whatever wrong they do is also piled on you. So your judgment is it's escalated. And so he's saying, these are my children, this is my church, these are my people, and they are failing to reflect my image. And this isn't just a normal sin, this is like a double sin. We used to say, jokingly, if you sinned on Sabbath, it was a double sin, right? Because you broke whatever commandment you broke, and then you broke the Sabbath too. So it was like you got a twofer, right? And that's what we would joke about. But literally, if you use your righteousness to oppress other people, you are actually creating greater condemnation for yourself. So when you start to say, oh, I'm so pious and I'm so good, you are really, really in danger, right? Of hellfire. So we kind of start to get this image, and then we start bleeding over into chapter 21, Luke chapter 21. And notice Jesus has not skipped a beat. He has not changed topics. He hasn't changed subjects. He is literally on the same theme. He's beating the same drum. Here, it's a very well-known story, verse 1. And then he turned his attention from the religious scholars to some wealthy people who were depositing their donations in the offering boxes. So they're giving to God, right? They've got these big coffers outside of the temple, and people are dumping in money, right? And he says, a widow, obviously poor, came up, and he says, you rob widows. He just said that. the previous verse. Now he looks and he sees a widow who's approaching one of the offering plates of ancient times. And she came up and she dropped 2 copper coins into one of the boxes that was set there outside the temple. And Jesus says this, I'm telling you the truth. This poor woman has made a bigger contribution than all of those rich fellows. And you can just imagine, these guys want pretentious prayers, they want to be seen, they're wearing these extravagant robes. You know when they bring their offering, it's straight up pennies, right? They're going to give $100 and it's all going to be in pennies. And they're out there and they've got like bag after bag and they're just like, they want to hear that change hitting the bottom, right? Like, and they're like, yeah, look at me, I'm giving a ton. But the reality is, they're not giving that much comparatively. This is what Jesus says. He says, verse 4, they're just giving from their surplus, but she is giving from her poverty. In fact, she is giving all she has to give. And so he says, what's going on in the outside is not a good reflection of what's going on in the inside, right? He says, their image is off, while that woman's image is spot on, right? Because it's not just how you talk, it's not what you wear, it's not what you say, it's how you live your life. And how you live your life, what values you believe, how you treat other people. This is a true reflection of the divine image, right? And this is a reflection of Christ who gave it all. God who gave it all. His only Son, Christ, right? And then he didn't come to be served and to be waited on, but he came to suffer and to have experienced the death of a regular criminal. You know, when we read in Spirit Across the Steps of Christ, where Ellen White says, when God gave Christ to humanity, he poured out all of heaven in one gift. There couldn't have been a larger gift given to humanity. So Jesus plus an angel was not larger. Jesus plus a whole host of angels would not have been a larger gift. When God gave Christ to humanity, he poured out all of heaven for you and for me, right? And so this is he didn't try to hold some back for himself. He gave it all. And this is the image that we are called to reflect, right? It's a fairly high standard. So image is everything. We've got to make sure we're bearing or reflecting that image correctly. Make sense? Comments, questions? You guys good? Still with me? All right. You're like, dude, we're just at the beginning of Luke. This is going to be forever. It's going to go quick. I'm going to make it go quick. It's going to happen. So we're going into verse 5. So some people, and I want you to see, he's going to start another story, and he's not going to switch topics. We've been talking about the exterior versus the interior, right? And how the interior is a true reflection of the image of God, and what's on the outside is often just a guise. It's a disguise to mask inward rottenness, right? Hypocrisy, deception. And so now he continues and he looks, and some people were impressed with the temple's opulence, the precious stones and expensive decorations, but Jesus countered their observation. See? So it's like, these Pharisees look really good, and Jesus says they're not, they're horrible. And then he goes, this widow, that they're all giving at the temple, the scribes and Pharisees are pouring in all these pennies and looking really good, but they're not giving that much money. And then this widow comes along and she's given more than all of them combined. And then you see this beautiful temple. He's setting us up. Luke is setting us up, right? What do you think happens next? Is it good stuff? It's an extravagant, beautiful temple, guys. Ooh, shiny, shiny, right? Like, oh, it's shiny. Right? Nice. Except for, he counters their observations. Verse 6, he says, go ahead, look around, and be impressed. But the days are coming when one stone will not be left standing on another, and everything here will be demolished. Why? Because he says, although this temple looks the part, it looks righteous, its true image is not. There's rottenness below the surface, below the core, right? And that's what he's going to explain, what he's going to spell out as we kind of move forward. And so the crowd says to Jesus in verse 7, when will this happen, teacher? And what signs will tell us that this is about to occur? And so Jesus starts to spell out a couple of things. He starts talking about the end of the world, and he starts talking about when this specific judgment is going to take place. And I want you to understand something. We're not talking about, what are we talking about here? What is it that's a sign at the end of the world? Think about that as we read this, right? In the context of everything that we've said, because I think the answer may surprise you, right? Verse 8, Jesus says, be careful, it is easy to be deceived by the outward appearance of righteousness, right? It's easy to be deceived. Many people will come claiming to have my authority and they shout, I am the one, or the time is now, or take a step in, but don't take a step in their direction. In other words, there's a lot of people who say that they're image bearers, that they represent the true God, right? He says, and they will try to get you to follow them, but don't do it. Don't believe what they say or how they dress. Don't look at the exterior. You have to make sure that the foundation is right. The foundation reflects the image. And he says, you'll hear about wars and conflicts. Don't be frightened at all, because these things must surely come, although they do not signify the immediate coming of the end. So he says, you're going to have hard times. Wars are always going to happen. Do you think wars are a reflection of God's image? No. Conflict a reflection of God's image? He says, no. This world is dark. It does not, in and of itself, reflect the image of God. It has to be given that. Just like the sun was given to this earth. But he says that's not what will bring about the end, right? Verse 10, you can count on this. Nations will attack nations, and kingdom will make war on kingdoms, and there will be disturbances around the world, from great earthquakes to famines and epidemics. Terrifying things will happen, and there will be shocking signs from heaven. But these are all exterior things, again, right? Because those wars are driven by people who no longer house or reflect the image of God. Does it make sense? And he says, you are the image bearers. You are the ones that are meant to stay true and be that light in the midst of all these terrible times. But he says, before this will happen, verse 12, they will capture you and persecute you. They will send you to the synagogue for trial and to prison for punishment. And you'll stand before kings and government officials for the sake of my name or my image. Right? Now, say, okay, guys, it's the end of time, right? We've got to get into our bunker. We've got to get our soybeans. We've got to get our canned goods. We've got to get our water, right? We've got to take care of ourselves. We've got to plan for this. We've got to prep hardcore stuff, right? And yet God doesn't say that. He doesn't say that at all. In fact, he says you're going to, and it's not a like if you don't prepare and get your bunker ready, you're going to be persecuted, right? He says bunker or no bunker, you're going to be persecuted. It's a waste, right? And who is going to do the persecution? Who's going to torture the saints and put the saints to death? What does the passage say? Like, dude, it's too small for us to read. Just give us the answer. It says they will capture you and persecute you. They will send you where? To the synagogue, to the church. They will send you to the synagogue for trial, to the temple for trial. It's the church that's persecuting the people of God, the true people of God. See, they have all the outward trappings of being righteous. And we think we're going to have salvation by having our names on the right church's books. And yet it's the church itself that's undermining the very image of God. And this isn't new. This has been going on in the days of Christ. This is going on in the Old Testament. Do you think this is going on today? Where church bodies at large are literally undermining the very work that God has sent His Son into the world to perform? Absolutely. But we don't have to be discouraged because this has been going on. And he says, you'll stand before kings and government officials in my name. Verse 14. Make up your mind in advance not to plan or your strategy for answering their questions. Look at this. Don't give any thought about prepping your bunker. Don't give any thought about prepping the soybeans. Right? Don't give any thought about all these other things that you're going to somehow preserve your life, or even how you're going to answer when you're being persecuted. He says, don't plan it out. He says, for when the time comes, I will give you the words to say. Wise words which none of your adversaries will be able to answer or argue against. In other words, he says, you're going to be persecuted, but you're my image bearers. And wherever my image is, I will be present. I will be present in a powerful way. So we don't have to hope that in the church. We hope in our Savior, in the one whose image we're trying to reflect. Right? You remember in 1 Corinthians 13, at the very end of that verse, or chapter rather, we say we look into a glass darkly, a mirror darkly, a darkened mirror, and we're trying to peer in there. And he says we can't quite see. But when he appears, Christ, when God appears, it says that mirror will get lighter and lighter as that light appears, and the mist will clear. And he says when we see him, we will recognize him because we will reflect his image. Right? We will be like him. We will be image bearers. So this is vital important. And God's going to be with us. And he says, listen, guys, it's not just the church that's going to persecute you. Verse 16, your parents, your brothers, your relatives, your friends will turn on you and turn you in, and some of you will be killed. Right? You will die, but you'll die as image bearers of Christ. If God came and sent his son, Jesus, to reflect his image, and the world hated God's image so much they killed him, how are we supposed to expect to avoid persecution or even death? Right? You guys with me? So this isn't quite the doomsday prepping that we were hoping for, right? It's saying that there's going to be tough times, and he says in verse 17, and all of you will be hated by everyone for the sake of my name. Why? Just not because you're a bad person, but because you reflect the divine image, and that image will show or expose the sinfulness of the church. It will show or expose the sinfulness of a religious leader. It will show or expose the sinfulness of the world. Right? And don't expect people to agree with you because they're in darkness. 19, by enduring all these things, you'll find not loss but gain. Not death, but authentic life. In other words, it's that inside-outside. They may kill the body, but they will never kill the image of God. Right? That image is still being reflected. Psalm 19 says, the heavens declare the glory of God. Day unto day gives forth speech, and night unto night great light. The stars declare the handiwork of God. And so his image is in everything and everywhere. And as you destroy the planet, as we destroy Earth, I think I saw somewhere recently in a news article, something like there's been 60% of the world's and wildlife has gone extinct since, I don't remember how, the last couple hundred years. And as we destroy the earth, we try to eradicate the image of God that was stamped in even the stars themselves, and yet we can't eradicate those stars. We may smog up the sky, and yet their light still shines. Right? And so the image of God will never be erased, but you do find in Revelation that God will destroy those who destroy or mar the planet, the earth. Right? Because we were given this earth to be caretakers of it. Because it also reflects his image. And it points and testifies of him to a world that's lost that we may not be able to reach any other way. Right? Kind of quiet here, guys. What do you think? Oh, you can't hear me. Okay, I don't know. Can we turn it up a little bit? All right, we're going to turn it up. Thank you for that. My wife gave me that. Should I start all the way over? I was wondering, I'm like, it's so quiet in here. You guys were listening. Thank you for that. So this image stuff, guys, is really, really important. There's the outward and there's the inward. And I may not need to go through the rest of this chapter. But over and over again, what we're going to find is that there's an outward and there's an inward. And God continues to point his people to the image, his image. And he says, here's how you will know that the destruction of Jerusalem and her temples and that Jerusalem will be surrounded by armies. And when that happens, there's only one thing to do. If you're in Judea, flee to the mountains. And if you're inside the city, escape. And if you're outside the city, stay there and don't enter. Right? So he seems to be giving very specific examples to this group. Right? Because the time has come, and we found that the Romans, at a certain point near 70 AD, they came and encircled the city of Jerusalem, and then for no reason they pulled back. And those believers who heeded this message, they escaped, and then their armies encircled them again. So on the outside, right, they were surrounded. It's an outside-inside image. And he says how sad it will be for all these people and the disaster and the swords and the nations and all this stuff. And so all these events All these events will take place, and there will be earth-shattering events, and the heavens themselves will seem to be shaken with signs in the sky, the moon and the stars, and across the earth, the outsider nations will feel the powerless and terrified face of the Lord crashing like a tidal wave upon them. And what has happened to the world? People will wonder. The cosmic order is destabilized. The image of God seems to be almost crushed or smashed to pieces. And we can almost no longer see that reflection. And when it gets the darkest, when the image of God is almost eradicated, then God himself appears in the clouds. We'll see that Son of Man coming in all of his power and his glory. And so that image has been trampled over thousands of years. It's suddenly renewed, and it's brought in with such force and such power that it can never be denied. And the kingdom of God starts ushering in and making all things new according to his image and his purpose. Guys, I want to be an image bearer. Right? Because only an image bearer is going to make it at the end. If only your righteousness and my righteousness would match that of the image of God rather than the worldly standards and images of righteousness, we can be safe. We can be safe even if we're persecuted. By the way, I have to say this. Yesterday is interesting. I was in the ICU, and one of the nurses was talking to me about this show called Doomsday Preppers. Have you seen this? It's both hilarious and sad and terrifying. There's like a lot of emotions going on, but people who are saying, I want to stay safe. I know our government's coming for us, or I know it's going to be the end of the world, or there's going to be a nuclear something, and they're building underground bunkers, and they're spending their military arsenals, and on and on and on. There's going to be so much hard cash. And what are they doing it for? It's not to help humanity. It's to help themselves. It's not to save the world, it's to save themselves, right? Someone had this critique of Batman. Now, I know this is kind of off. Now we've really gone into it, right? They said, here is Bruce Wayne, this billionaire, right? And he spends all of his money making all these cool weapons for himself so he can fight crime that's probably come from the poverty that's being experienced in the city, which he could address with his resources, and then he wouldn't need all those weapons, right? Because people would be happy with homes and jobs and, meals and all this other stuff. But because he's using his resources selfishly, he's not getting the results he wants. And so, guys, if your intent in the end of time is to preserve yourself, I don't think that's the image of God. The God who gave everything, who lost everything for the good of someone else, someone who hated him, that would be me and that would be you, then we are not living the divine similitude or image that God lived, right? We can go on, we're not going to do that. What I want to do is I want to end with a couple stories of things that I see, because I think our church is in jeopardy of losing the image of God, right? When we read Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, the Bible very explicitly said that God's image was reflected in man and woman. That is, God said it, I believe it, that settles it for me, right? That is so explicit and so clear, it's very hard to deny that on any grounds. And when we, as a church or as a society, we try to diminish the role of men or women, and we do it because for the sake of righteousness, I think we're in double penalty zone. We are not only not bearing the image of God, but we're lifting up our unrighteousness as if we're righteousness, and we are in danger of hellfire. And if you are an image bearer, then it is our duty as image bearers to stand up and to say, that is not right. That is not the image of God, because God said, man and woman, image bearers, collectively, right? God does not oppress. He doesn't enslave. He doesn't force. And with image bearers, we have to call sin by its right name, because that's what the image of God does. The image of God convicts and converts the human heart, right? In fact, sometimes the image of God creates persecution, because those who live in darkness don't want that light to be shined upon them. What does the church do? Maybe the church says, what we're going to do is we're not only going to oppress, but then we're going to persecute anyone who doesn't agree with us. But we're going to persecute them for the sake of what we call unity, right? and we've twisted truth, and we've turned it on its head, and now the wrong is right, and the right is wrong. Right? And how are we going to escape judgment? Right? Maybe it's just going to be you that escapes, but you need to escape because God has called you. And if you have to leave and it's just you and your family remaining behind, that's how it has to be. Right? Just like in the days of Sodom and Gomorrah, you bring out anyone that will bear that image of the divine with you. But we have to continue to bear that image, especially as the world gets dark. Does it make sense? I have more stories. Let's skip forward. And this isn't going to show up. I want you to meet Ashley Aldridge, which you can't see her face. She was actually a mom, 2 young kids, and she actually lived from she hails from Illinois. This is where my wife and I moved from, and some years ago, she was at her kitchen window, and she's doing dishes, and she lives really close to the railroad tracks, and she sees a man in a wheelchair. He was a vet. She didn't know that, but he's a vet. And older gentleman that he tries to wheel himself across the railroad tracks by her house, and one of his wheels gets stuck in the railroad tracks. And she sees him kind of struggling. A couple cars pass by. They don't stop for him. It's a little cold. And she thinks, I better go take care of him. So she has 2 young kids, probably under the age of 5. And so she goes to her neighbor's house and says, hey, can you take care of watch my kids for a couple of minutes? I want to go and help this guy out. And she goes out and she starts to try to free this man's wheelchair from the tracks, but it's really stuck and she can't do it. And this guy, she tries to pull him and he's too big. He's just too big. And as she's starting to try to pull on him, she hears the train coming. True story. She hears the train coming. And the train is traveling at 80 miles an hour. 80 miles an hour. She's stuck on the tracks, and there is a man that she is trying to save. This old vet, right? She has never met. She does not know. And he is too large for her to lift. And that train, she has moments. She has moments to make a decision whether she wants to continue to help this man and risk her life but leave 2 young children behind, or if she's going to just step back and make sure her kids are safe, even though she can't rescue this man. And she says she stayed with him and she struggled, and she, in one last Herculean effort, pulled with all her might, and they fell backwards. His wheelchair fell backwards. He came off the tracks just as that train smashed this wheelchair, and he found metal and plastic a mile down the tracks. Right? I think this woman, she reflected the image of God. What do you think? She was a reflection. She risked it all for someone she didn't even know. Does that sound like anybody? I think there's somebody I've heard about. Right? And she actually is living this. Let me look at this man. This is Keith Fletcher. Keith Fletcher. Maybe some of you recognize him. Some of you may know him. There a couple years ago, I think it was a couple of years ago, time gets a little fuzzy when you're a parent with small kids. Somebody laugh, you know. All right, some of the film is not being, whatever the word is, right? So Keith was on a train in Portland, Oregon, and he was traveling with a couple of women that were Muslim. And one of them had the Muslim headdress when a man began to get very violent and confrontational to these women. And Keith, along with 2 other men, stood between these Muslim women. They're not Muslim, but they stood between these Muslim women and this man. All 3 of them were stabbed. 2 of them lost their lives that day. Fletcher had the stab onto his face, and along his neck there has a huge scar. And he did not know these women. They were not part of his faith community. He did not know them from anyone, but he saved those 2 women's lives that day, right? Now, Keith actually, apparently, he was on the spectrum, and as he was raised, as he's going through the school system, he said that he was bullied, he was beaten up, he was all the time. And he said it came without thinking that, of course, I would stand up for anybody who's going to be bullied. Right? I was going to risk, and I would risk everything for the sake of someone I don't even know and I don't even agree with. You know, I wonder, he reminds me of somebody. Somebody, right? I think I've heard of someone who would risk it all and give their life for somebody. It's someone. I've heard of this before. This is an image bearer, right? This is an image bearer. One more. This is a recent memory. This is a recent one, right? Last one. Have you guys seen this story? This is a church, Dutch church. I think it's in Hague. And this Dutch, there was this family, this Dutch family. They were refugees or asylum seekers, right? And my wife, I think, tried to mount the actual city. Armenian, yeah, okay, yeah. So they're Armenian. They're asylum seekers from Armenia, and they're there for their own safety, because if they went home, they would be killed. Now, they had 2 hearings, and this family had been there for 9 years. 9 years. And now, they had a first ruling on this family staying, and they're definitely going to stay, but it wasn't enough. Someone pushed it, and so there was a second hearing, and it came back again. No, we're going to protect this family is going to stay. And then the third hearing came, and somehow it was the right mix or the right time or whatever, and they said, okay, we're going to deport this family, even though it's mom and a dad and 3 kids, and all 5 of them will be probably killed as soon as they get to Armenia. All right, we're going to allow this. And what happened is, when they heard about this, this family ran to the church. They ran to the church. And the church understood there was a loophole, there was a law. That if they could have a church service, that the law said the police could not come into the building as long as the church service was going. And so they started to have a church service. Right? And you talk about worship God every day, right? Worship Him all the time. This is what this church has decided to do. They have been having a continual church service, day and night, every minute of the day, since October 25. For 5 weeks, they have been worshiping without stop to save the lives of these 5 Armenians that they don't know, that are refugees. You think they don't even have rights in this country, in the Dutch country, right? Why would they risk so much for someone that doesn't belong? I think I know why, right? Because I know someone else who gave everything for you and for me so that we might be saved in the end. Guys, this isn't a game. If this is a game, let's stop playing it. I believe there is a right and there is a wrong. There is an image of God and there's a counterfeit of God. And if your God leads you to persecution and oppression and hate speech because you're the wrong religion or the wrong sexual orientation or because you're the wrong faith, you are not reflecting the image of God and you are in danger of hellfire. And I think it's my responsibility to share that with you. And so be strong. You don't stand alone. God stands with you. And when you stand, the words will be given to you what to say that cannot be questioned because you are reflecting His image. Guys, we live in a dark day, a dark chapter of Earth's history. My plea for you is that you will shine bright as the world gets ever darker. Thank you.